My name is Nico, 23 years old, college dropout, and the last person who should ever have ended up in the military. Growing up in a liberal household with two professors for parents, I was raised on anti-war documentaries and dinner table discussions about the military-industrial complex. I planned to follow in my parents' academic footsteps until 3 semesters of mediocre grades and mounting student debt forced me to face reality. Maybe the ivory tower wasn't for me. So there I was, living in my childhood bedroom, working part-time at a coffee shop, and trying to ignore my parents' concerned glances. Then came the DUI. Not my finest moment, just a few beers after my shift, but enough to put me over the limit when I was pulled over for a broken taillight. The judge gave me 2 options, jail time or military service. My parents were horrified. I was terrified. But between the concrete walls of a cell and the structured environment of basic training, the latter seemed marginally less awful. So I signed the papers, said goodbye to my civilian life, and boarded a bus to Fort Benning with a hangover and a chip on my shoulder the size of Georgia. The first week was exactly the hell I'd expected. Drill sergeants screaming in my face, pre-dawn wake-ups, and physical training that left me vomiting behind the barracks. I was soft, uncoordinated, and openly resentful, a combination that made me an instant target. Crawford, you call that a push-up? My grandmother could do better, and she's been dead for 10 years. That was Drill Sergeant Elias Hayes, the bane of my existence, and, though I didn't know it yet, the man who would completely change my life. D.S. Hayes was everything I wasn't, tall, powerfully built, with the kind of physical confidence that came from absolute certainty in one's body. His dark skin gleamed with sweat even in the early morning chill, and his voice could cut through noise like a combat knife. He had the unnerving ability to spot weakness from 50 yards, a skill he seemed to use exclusively on me. Crawford, front and center. It was the end of our second week, and I just failed spectacularly at the obstacle course, falling face first into the mud pit. I trudged forward, dripping brown sludge, to stand before him. Yes, drill sergeant, I mumbled, eyes fixed on the ground. Look at me when I'm speaking to you, recruit. I raised my eyes reluctantly. Up close, D.S. Hayes was even more intimidating. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with 5 o'clock shadow despite the early hour, and eyes so intensely brown they looked black. But it was his mouth that caught my attention, currently pressed into a hard line of disapproval, but with a fullness that suggested it might be expressive under different circumstances. You want to tell me what that pathetic display was about? He demanded. I slipped, drill sergeant. You slipped. His voice was flat with disbelief. Is that what you're going to tell your battle buddies when they're counting on you in the field? Sorry I couldn't provide cover fire. I slipped. Heat crawled up my neck. No, drill sergeant. No is right. Because you won't make it to the field if you don't get your act together. He leaned closer, his voice dropping so only I could hear. I know your type, Crawford. You think you're too good for this. Too smart. That this is all beneath you. I swallowed hard, uncomfortable with how accurately he'd read me. Here's the thing, he continued. I don't care why you're here. Court order, money for college, family tradition, doesn't matter. You're here now, which means your mind is shaped into a soldier. And I don't fail. Ever. He straightened up. 20 minutes, my office. Cleaned up. Don't be late. 20 minutes later, scrubbed free of mud but still damp around the edges, I knocked on his office door. Enter. The office was spare but not sterile. A desk with a computer and neatly stacked papers. A bookshelf containing military manuals, but also, surprisingly, several volumes of poetry and philosophy. A framed photograph of a younger D.S. Hayes in combat gear, arms slung around another soldier's shoulders, both grinning against a backdrop of desert sand. He sat behind the desk, writing in what looked like a journal. He didn't look up immediately, making me stand at attention for a full minute before acknowledging my presence. At ease, Crawford. Sit. I sat in the chair across from him, back straight, unsure what to expect. Your file says you completed 3 semesters at Berkeley before dropping out, he said, closing the journal. Political science major. Yes, drill sergeant. Smart kid. Good family. No prior trouble with the law until the DUI. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. So what went wrong? The question caught me off guard. I'd expected more yelling, maybe extra PT, not whatever this was. I don't know what you mean, drill sergeant. Sure you do. Smart kid like you doesn't just flush his future down the toilet for no reason. So what was it? Drugs? Girl trouble? Boy trouble? My head snapped up at that last suggestion, but his expression revealed nothing. I just lost direction, I admitted, deciding honesty was the safest approach. Wasn't sure political science was what I wanted anymore. Couldn't see the point of accumulating debt for a degree I might never use. He nodded slowly. That I understand. Sense of purpose is essential. Without it, we're just going through motions. He leaned forward. But here's what I don't get. Since arriving, you've done the bare minimum. Sometimes less. You're physically capable. I've watched you. You're smart. Your test scores prove it. Yet you're failing. With all due respect, drill sergeant, I didn't exactly choose to be here. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Few people wake up one morning and think, you know what would be fun? Having a drill sergeant scream in my face while I do push-ups in the rain. The smile vanished. But here's a reality check, Crawford. Choice or not, you're here now. And I see 2 paths forward for you. Continue half-assing your way through, making yourself and everyone around you miserable. Or commit. Find purpose in this experience, even if it's not the one you would have chosen. I stared at him, surprised by the unexpected depth of his insight. I'm assigning you extra PT, he said, his tone shifting back to all business. Every evening, 1900 hours. With me. With you, drill sergeant? I couldn't hide my dismay. Problem with that, recruit? No, drill sergeant. Good. Because I think you need individual attention. And I'm very attentive to problems that need solving. He stood, signaling the end of our conversation. Dismissed. That evening at exactly 1900 hours, I reported to the PT field, stomach churning with dread. DS Hayes was already there, changed from his uniform into PT gear, a gray t-shirt that clung to his broad shoulders and athletic shorts that revealed muscular legs. Crawford, he acknowledged. 5 laps to warm up. Go. For the next hour, he put me through a personalized version of hell, sprints, burpees, mountain climbers, and exercises I didn't even know the names of. Throughout it all, he didn't just bark orders. He worked alongside me, demonstrating proper form, pushing me to match his pace. By the end, I was drenched in sweat, muscles burning, lungs heaving for air. I collapsed onto the grass, staring up at the darkening sky. To my surprise, DS Hayes sat down beside me, barely winded. Not bad for day one. You've got natural endurance. Doesn't feel like it, I gasped. That's because you've never pushed yourself. Coasted on natural ability. He handed me a water bottle. Tomorrow we'll focus on upper body strength. Your push-ups are embarrassing. Looking forward to it, I said, sarcasm slipping through before I could stop it. Instead of the reprimand I expected, he laughed, a rich, warm sound that transformed his face. For the first time, I saw him not as the terrifying DS Hayes, but as a person. Elias. It was unsettling. You've got spirit, Crawford. I'll give you that. He stood, extending a hand to help me up. Same time tomorrow. Don't be late. Our evening sessions continued for weeks. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, something changed. My body, for one thing, growing leaner, stronger, more capable. But also my attitude. I found myself pushing harder, not just during our private sessions, but throughout the day's regular training. I started paying attention during tactical instruction, asking questions about weapon systems, volunteering for demonstrations. The other recruits noticed. Some respected the improvement. Others resented the special attention I received from DS Hayes. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was focused on something beyond myself, beyond the next day or week. I was building toward something. And then there was D.S. Hayes himself. During our evening sessions, a different side of him emerged. Still demanding, still intense, but also thoughtful, occasionally even sharing insights about his own journey through the military. Never planned on being a drill sergeant. He admitted one evening, as we cooled down after a particularly brutal session. Wanted combat deployment. Action. What changed? I asked, stretching my hamstrings. IED in Afghanistan. Took some shrapnel in my leg. He tapped his right thigh. Not enough to discharge me, but enough to limit my options. Teaching turned out to be a good fit, though, shaping raw material into something worthwhile. His eyes met mine. Some materials more challenging than others. I smiled despite myself. Am I still your most challenging? Top 3 easily. But there was no malice in his voice, maybe even a hint of fondness. For weeks into our private training, I realized something troubling. I was developing feelings for D.S. Hayes. Not just respect or admiration, but something far more inappropriate. Attraction. I noticed things I shouldn't. The way sweat traced the contours of his neck, how his hands looked demonstrating proper grip on a weapon, the rare smiles that transformed his face. It was beyond inappropriate. He was my drill sergeant. I was his subordinate. The power dynamic alone made any such feelings problematic, not to mention military regulations, the potential for career-ending consequences for him, and the very real possibility that he was completely straight and would be disgusted if he knew. So I buried it, channeled that energy into training harder, running faster, becoming the soldier he believed I could be. And if sometimes, late at night, my thoughts wandered to those strong hands and rare smiles, well, that was my problem to manage. The change in me didn't go unnoticed. 6 weeks into basic, during a field exercise, our squad leader was injured in the simulation, and I automatically stepped up, organizing our defense and completing the mission. Afterward, the evaluating officer, not D.S. Hayes, commended my leadership. Crawford, D.S. Hayes called later that day as we filed into the mess hall. A word. I followed him to a quiet corner, expecting feedback on the exercise. You've been recommended for advanced individual training in intelligence, he said without preamble. Your aptitude scores qualify you, and today's leadership display sealed it. If you accept, after basic, you'll go to Fort Huachuca for specialized training. I stared at him, processing. Intelligence? Like spy stuff? He smirked. Not exactly. Analysis, mostly. Using that brain of yours for something besides arguing philosophy. You're recommending me? I am. His eyes held mine. You've earned it, Crawford. You've become one of our strongest recruits. The transformation has been remarkable. Something in his tone made my heart rate pick up. Thank you, drill sergeant. Consider it carefully. Intelligence is demanding, but it could set you up for a meaningful career path. He hesitated, then added more quietly. You have potential, Nico. Real potential. It was the first time he'd used my first name. It shouldn't have affected me as much as it did. I'll consider it, I managed. He nodded. Good. Now go eat. You're still too skinny. As basic training neared its end, our evening PT sessions continued, though their intensity had evolved. Now we often ended with conversations about military strategy, world events, sometimes literature, drawing on those books I'd noticed in his office. I learned he had a degree in English literature from Virginia, earned before enlisting. That he wrote poetry in his spare time, but would deny it to my dying breath if you tell anyone. That he had a younger sister in medical school and parents who still didn't fully understand his choice to serve. The more I knew him, the deeper my inconvenient feelings grew. I tried to ignore them, to focus on the impending graduation and my decision about AIT. But they persisted, a constant undercurrent to our interactions. 3 days before graduation, we had what would be our final private PT session. After a challenging but not brutal workout, we sat on the bleachers, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "So," he said after a comfortable silence, "have you decided about intelligence?" "I have," I replied, having made my decision the previous night. "I'm accepting." He nodded, something like satisfaction in his expression. "Good choice. You'll excel there." "Thanks to your training," I said, meaning it. "I wouldn't have made it through basic without your attention. You had it in you all along. Just needed someone to see past the attitude." He turned to look at me directly. "You know why I singled you out that day at the obstacle course?" I shook my head. "Because I saw myself in you. The wasted potential. The chip on your shoulder." His voice softened. "I had a mentor who did for me what I hope I've done for you. Gave me direction when I was drifting. You've done more than that," I said before I could censor myself. "You've changed how I see myself. What I'm capable of." Something shifted in his eyes, a warmth, an intensity that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps had always been there, carefully controlled. "Nico," he said, my name almost a sigh. "After graduation." "Drill Sergeant Hayes." A voice called from across the field. Another drill sergeant was approaching, waving a folder. "Need your signature on these evals before 2000. The moment shattered. D.S. Hayes stood, composure instantly restored. "Be right there," he called, then turned back to me. "We're done for today, Crawford. Get some rest." He walked away without finishing whatever he'd been about to say, leaving me with a hollow feeling in my chest and questions I couldn't voice. Graduation day arrived with perfect military precision. Uniforms pressed, boots gleaming, families in attendance. My parents had come, their initial horror at my enlistment gradually softened by my increasingly positive phone calls home. They sat in the bleachers, looking both proud and slightly bewildered as I marched past with my platoon. After the ceremony, amid the chaos of reunions and goodbyes, D.S. Hayes approached our small family group. In his dress uniform, he was even more imposing, medals gleaming on his chest. "Mr. and Mrs. Crawford," he said, extending his hand. "Drill Sergeant Hayes, your son has been an outstanding recruit." My father, the peace activist professor, hesitated only briefly before shaking his hand. "Thank you for your guidance. Nico speaks highly of you." "The transformation has been remarkable," my mother added. "We hardly recognized him when he stepped off that bus. And I don't just mean physically." D.S. Hayes nodded. "Your son has natural leadership abilities. Intelligence is lucky to get him." The conversation continued, polite and professional, but throughout, I was aware of a tension in D.S. Hayes that hadn't been there before. His eyes kept finding mine over my parents' heads, communicating something I couldn't quite interpret. Finally, he excused himself. "Crawford, a word before you ship out tomorrow?" "Of course, Drill Sergeant." "My office, 1900 hours." A nod to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Crawford, a pleasure." Then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd of celebrating families and graduates. "He seems intense," my mother observed. "He is," I agreed. "But he's a good man." That evening, after my parents had returned to their hotel with plans to meet for breakfast before my departure, I found myself standing outside D.S. Hayes' office at exactly 1900 hours. For the last time, I knocked on the familiar door. "Enter." The office looked different. Boxes stacked in one corner, the bookshelf half empty, the desk cleared of personal items. "You're leaving?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. D.S. Hayes, Elias, I allowed myself to think, nodded. "New assignment. Training battalion at Fort Leonard Wood." "Congratulations," I said automatically, though the news left me oddly bereft. "When do you go?" 2 weeks. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, please." I sat, noting that he'd changed from his dress uniform into more casual attire, a black t-shirt and cargo pants. Without the uniform, the dynamic between us felt subtly altered. "I wanted to speak with you privately before you left for AIT," he began, his voice more hesitant than I'd ever heard it. "To tell you how proud I am of your progress. And to give you this." He handed me a small, flat object wrapped in simple brown paper. I unwrapped it carefully to find a book. A collection of poems by Mary Oliver, well worn, with notes in the margins written in a precise hand I recognized from evaluations. Your personal copy, I said, touched beyond measure. Poetry helped me make sense of my experiences in Afghanistan, he said quietly. This collection in particular. I thought it might serve you as well. Thank you. I ran my fingers over the cover, overwhelmed by the personal nature of the gift. I'll treasure it. There's something else. He stood, moving to the window, his back to me. Something I couldn't say while you were under my direct command. My heart rate accelerated. What is that, drill sergeant? He turned, his expression serious. As of 4 hours ago, you graduated. I'm no longer your drill sergeant. And in 2 days, you'll be at Fort Huachuca, under completely different command. Yes, I said, uncertain where this was going. What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that the chain of command that prohibited certain conversations between us no longer applies. I stood slowly, hope and uncertainty battling in my chest. What conversations would those be? He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, stopping just short of touching me. The kind where I tell you that watching you transform from that resentful recruit into the soldier you are now has been the most rewarding experience of my career. That your determination, your intelligence, your resilience have impressed me beyond words. Elias, I said, testing his first name on my tongue. The kind, he continued, his voice dropping lower, where I admit that my interest in you crossed professional boundaries weeks ago, though I've never acted on it. Would never have acted on it while you were under my command. The room seemed to shrink, the air between us charged with possibility. And now? I asked, barely above a whisper. Now I'm asking if you would consider having dinner with me. Not tonight. That would still be inappropriate. But perhaps when you have leave from AIT. If you're interested. Interested, I repeated, a smile spreading across my face. I've been fighting my feelings for you since our 3rd PT session. Relief and something like joy transformed his features. You hide it well. I had a good teacher in self-discipline, I countered. He laughed softly, then grew serious again. This won't be easy. Military relationships never are, especially ours. I understood what he wasn't saying. Don't ask, don't tell had been repealed, but that didn't mean same-sex relationships in the military were without complications. I know, I said, but if basic training taught me anything, it's that difficult doesn't mean impossible. Just requires strategy, determination, and occasional creative problem-solving. His smile returned, warming his eyes. You really did pay attention. To you? Always. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to, and rested his hand against my cheek. The touch was electric, simple, but loaded with meaning after weeks of careful distance. I can't kiss you, he said regretfully. Not yet. Not here. But soon. I leaned into his touch. I'll hold you to that, drill sergeant. Elias, he corrected gently. Just Elias now. Elias. I agreed, savoring the name. We stayed like that for a moment longer, his hand warm against my face, the promise of something more hanging between us. Then, with visible reluctance, he stepped back. You should go. Get rest before your trip tomorrow. I nodded, understanding the wisdom even as I wanted to stay. When will I see you again? I'll make sure of it before I leave for Fort Leonard Wood. And after that, we'll figure it out. That's an order, soldier. I smiled, snapping a playful salute. Yes, sir. As I walked back to the barracks that night, Mary Oliver's poems tucked safely in my pocket, I marveled at the twists life could take. 6 months ago, I was a directionless college dropout, facing a DUI charge. Now I was a soldier heading for specialized training, with purpose in my steps and the beginnings of something profound with a man who had seen value in me when I couldn't see it myself. The military was nothing like I'd expected. Neither was falling in love. But both, it seemed, had arrived in my life at exactly the right moment, reshaping me into someone stronger, more disciplined, and paradoxically, more free than I'd ever been before. My name is Nico, 23 years old, soldier, and no longer lost. Sometimes the wrong path leads you exactly where you need to be, and sometimes the person who pushes you hardest is the one who believes in you most. I don't know exactly what the future holds for Elias and me. Military careers are unpredictable, and relationships within this world have their own unique challenges. But I do know that I've found something worth fighting for, both in my newfound purpose and in the man who helped me discover it. And if there's one thing I've learned from Drill Sergeant Hayes, it's that with proper training, discipline, and heart, no obstacle is insurmountable. At attention, ready for whatever comes next.